In 1930s America, the time was marked by the depression that was so great that hard times did not care about what culture you were of. If you were so-called white, you felt that Great Depression. But if you were so-called black, you probably felt it a little harder. Unemployment rates were higher for black workers than it was for their white counterparts, and racial discriminatory laws often excluded them from New Deal programs. Segregation laws and discriminatory practices caused tension and squeezed many so-called blacks to continue fleeing from the southern states to elsewhere. Despite economic hardships and tensions betwixt different cultures, the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural, social, and artistic explosion centered in Harlem, New York, continued into the 1930s.
It's the call of the jitterbug. It's the call of the jitterbug. It's the call of the jitterbug.
This movement celebrated black culture and produced important works of art. Literature, jazz, and even swing music became the popular genre of American music. Figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington were prominent figures during this time. But one thing many history books failed to talk about were the transitions of the filmmakers from the 1920s, like Oscar Micheaux, learning to transition from silent films to sound films, and the rise of a new generation of filmmakers and actors within the so-called black community, establishing their name in the annals of film history. Peace and blessings, everyone, and welcome to Handlebar Films. This episode will be a top 10 list of the best Afro-American films created in the 1930s. Unlike my best Afro-American film list of the 1920s was ranked, for the 1930s and so on forth with any top 10 list I do, it will be ranked very differently. For there were many lost and incomplete films in the 1920s which put me in an honest situation to do a top 5 list only. There are many lost films in the 1930s and are enough films for me to do a top 10 list. FYI, this is my top 10 list, and I will try to be as objective as possible. Plot and originality are the most important things in any story I read or watch. So, without further ado, let's start with the honorable mention. Hallelujah. Though this film was released in 1929, I simply forgot to put it in the 1920s top films. This film was a 1929 American pre-code musical drama film directed by King Vidor. The film tells the story of Zeke, a sharecropper who gets in trouble after being cheated out of his earnings. He accidentally kills a man and turns to religion, becoming a preacher. However, his faith is tested when he encounters a woman named Chick, who tempted him back into a life of sin. It is worthy of honorable mention because of the historical significance. It is a landmark film in the history of African American cinema that provided a glimpse into the social and cultural context of the time and the challenges faced by black actors and filmmakers. And though not a black director, the direction of King Vidor, who is a very respected director, known for his innovative camera work and storytelling techniques, elevated this film in my opinion. Hallelujah is a very good example of his visual style and his ability to capture emotional depth in his characters. A very melodramatic film that I do recommend. The Exile by Oscar Micheaux. The first honorable mention goes to the first sound film made by a black filmmaker, none other than Oscar Micheaux. It is pure poetry that the leading pioneer and the most impactful so-called Afro-American filmmaker in its nativity stages directed and wrote the first so-called black talkie film. However, though Oscar Micheaux was the leading filmmaker in the 1920s, it was very clear that his transition into sound films was a very travailing journey. The Exile, which was an adaptation of his first novel, The Conquest, was about a woman named Edith Duval who becomes a powerful figure in the black community of Chicago who falls in love with an idealistic man named Jean-Baptiste. Their love begins on the shaky grounds because the two lovers had different ideals and personalities. Edith being somewhat cynical and had goals to convert her mansion into a speakeasy, while Jean-Baptiste wanted a plain life in the country where they could own land. They decided to part ways and live their lives for years, where they both become successful at life doing the thing that they wanted to do. until they met again under complicated circumstances 5 years later. The lead actress, played by Eunice Brooks, was the best performance of the whole film. Her character was supposed to be a cynic, and she carried that conviction indeed. Again, I say, Oscar Micheaux directed the film that he wrote, and it felt like his vision indeed. The reason why this film is ranked outside the top 10 is because the pacing of this film is a bit slow until the last 15 minutes, where the drama actually begins to intensify everything that the plot sets up throughout the film. The second flaw, which was a problem I had when I watched the 1930s Michaux's films, was the amount of musical numbers in the films. I personally did not have a problem with the dance and swing band ensembles being in the film, for I think it was truly a testament of the culture of the 1930s, as well as it fits with the plot since one of the settings was a speakeasy. The problem, however, was that the quantity and the duration of those numbers were a little too much and went on for far too long, messing up the pacing of an already slow-paced film and distracting when tensions began to rise. Needless to say, the plot of the film was very original, and the rest of the acting was not bad at all. But just off the cultural impact and the feat for the culture being the first so-called black talkie film makes this movie deserving of honorable mention. The Bronze Buckaroo. The last honorable mention film is a Western film starring Herb Jeffries in The Bronze Buckaroo. This film was one of the 4 race-era Western films starring the so-called black singing cowboy played by Herb Jeffries. The films include Harlem on the Prairie, The Bronze Buckaroo, Harlem Rise on the Range, and Two Gunmen from Harlem. But out of all the films, The Bronze Buckaroo stood out the most. The components that made this film worth an honorable mention was the originality of the plot and the engaging storyline of Cowboy Bob Blake, who receives a letter from his friend Joe Jackson asking for help, who turns out to be kidnapped by a local land grabber who discovered gold on the land of the ranch, where our hero Blake and his posse travel to Jackson Ranch, only to discover from Jackson's sister, Betty, that Joe has been missing for some weeks. Blake discovers that Jackson is being held by a local and land-grabbing rancher, Buck Thorne, who, with his partner Pete, played by the one and only Spencer Williams, has discovered gold on the ranch. They kill Joe's and Betty's father and are trying to force Joe to deed the land over to Thorne. Our single hero Blake develops a plan and executes it, of course having conflict before achieving their goals. The film would have been better if it had a better budget. I do understand the limitation of this time, but I would not favor this film over the other films on this list. Here, this film was very enjoyable, but only honorable to mention. Harlem is Heaven. The importance of Bill Bojangles Robinson's to not only black filmmaking, but filmmaking in general is not to be slighted. By 1932, he was already a veteran of 2 Broadway shows when he was commissioned to star in his first big screen role in this all-black cast musical called Harlem is Heaven. This film is about a young woman named Jean Stratton who comes to Harlem looking for work. She gets a job as a showgirl at the Acme Theater, where she meets and falls in love with a tap dancer named Chummy Walker. However, their relationship is complicated by the theater owner, Money Johnson, who is a racketeer. Money tricks Chummy into taking the fall for his crimes, and Bill Robinson, the director and star of the theater troupe, must put aside his feelings to help reunite the 2 lovers. The quality of editing and direction in this film is not the absolute best, but it's not the absolute worst. But the entertainment is what makes this film all the worth watching. I'm not going to drool over the fact that it was an all-star black cast, but why you should watch it beside the plot is because of the cast's great performance. Most of the cast members were clearly billed entertainers who performed in Broadway, or even more impressive, Harlem's Cotton Club, i.e. James Baskett, Anise Boyer, Henry Wessel, and Alma Smith, and of course, Bill Bojangles Robinson. The film is notable for its all African-American cast, which was rare for the time. The flaw in this film was the quality. However, it wasn't to the point of being unwatchable. But again, it's not worthy of the top 5, but that is why this film, Harlem is Heaven, is number 10. Drums of Voodoo. This movie revolves around themes of voodoo and supernatural beliefs set in the southern United States, specifically Louisiana. It explores cultural conflicts and the interplay between Christians and voodoo practices among Afro-American communities. Central to the story is a plot involving the use of voodoo to influence the outcome of a family inheritance dispute. Starring Laura Bowman, written by J. August Smith, who plays the elder in the film. The movie starts off juxtaposing a voodoo shouting drum circle with black folks in the juke joint and Ebenezer going to Aunt Hagar, who is the voodoo witch of the town, asking her to work her charm on a woman at the church to love him so he can pimp her out. Secrets and fights betwixt the Christians, the pimp, and the voodoo woman makes the story so much interesting to watch. The film offers a glimpse into the cultural landscape of the time, exploring the roles of voodoo and Christianity within the black community in the Deep South, especially in Louisiana, showcasing elements of African American folklore and spirituality, particularly through its depiction of voodoo practices, which are portrayed more as a cultural tradition rather than sinister or negative rituals. It reflects on the community dynamics and the character's struggle with identity, often highlighting tension between embracing traditional beliefs and adapting to new social realities. The film brings up issues of morality, justice, and power, with characters weighing personal gain against ethical decisions, often in the context of family and loyalty. The staging and directing of the film is something that's always sticking out, for something is always happening on screen. Nothing is ever stagnant, even in the background. It is staged and acted almost like a theater play. However, what does the film a disservice is the extremely rushed ending. Therefore, it will only be number 9 on this list. Murder in Harlem. Oscar Mashaw's Murder in Harlem tells the story of Henry Glory, a black night watchman who is accused of murdering a white woman. However, her white boss was actually the one that was responsible. An author turned attorney, Henry Glory, is hired by the accused man's sister to defend him. Glory pieces the crime together, and the white killer is revealed. I believe the best part of the film is the character Henry Glory, played by Clarence Brooks, who starts off as an author who is selling his book door to door and who inspires to be a lawyer and had a love interest that happened to become deferred after he got mugged. This film was actually a remake of his now lost 1921 silent film. Murder in Harlem is a 1935 American film directed by the famous Oscar Mashaw, and the film is loosely based on the real life case of Leo Frank. However, it changes the details of the real case, which was highly prejudiced against Frank due to his being a Jewish man in Georgia at the time. Unlike in this film, Frank's guilt is often viewed with great skepticism due to his never receiving a fair trial. All in all, this film was a great film. If you like a nice little court drama, and you will be bereaved of a musical number that Mashaw seemed to enjoy during this era, as well as the performance played by Clarence Brooks was actually worthy of the number 8 bid on this list. Swing. Here we receive another Oscar Mashaw film. This film is about a woman named Mandy Jenkins, played by Cora Green, aka the Creole Singer, is a cook for a wealthy white family in Birmingham, Alabama, when she discovers her husband Cornell having an affair with Eloise Jackson. When she confronts her husband and Eloise at a juke joint, a violent fight ensues. Eloise leaves Birmingham and she relocates to Harlem, getting a job as a cabaret vocalist under the stage name Cora Smith. She is followed to Harlem by her husband Lem, who gets mixed up in the local crime scene. Mandy, who also arrives in New York, having left Cornell, she gets a job as the wardrobe mistress at their cabaret where Eloise is performing. When Eloise breaks her legs during the drunken fall, Mandy is recruited as a last-minute substitute, and she actually flourishes. The funny thing about Oscar Micheaux films in the 1930s was that he had a lot of scenes with swing and big band performances and dancers that may fit at times, and at times it didn't. Out of all the films that had swing and big band and dancer performances, this film, that's actually called Swing, fits the best. Though, in my personal opinion, it is not as good as his films from the 1920s, such as Body and Soul. Out of all the films of the 1930s he wrote and directed, Swing was hands down the best film. Paradise in Harlem. I felt that Paradise in Harlem had the most unique plot out of all the films on this list. The plot is about a so-called black man named Lim Anderson, played by Frank Wilson, who was a minstrel dancer, but had aspirations to do more of a high art such as Shakespeare. However, due to how the public perceived black folks and were already used to seeing black folks doing more of a comedic role rather than the dramatic and serious roles like Shakespeare and Othello, he settles until the quote-unquote right time comes. But those aspirations come to a standstill when he witnesses a murder by the mob, in which the mob forces him to leave town. When he heads back down south to the Dixie line, he becomes an actor doing minstrel shows again. However, he eventually gets fired because his heart desire is to be an actor who does serious roles in Harlem. After getting into a drunken depression, some of his actor friends from Harlem find him in a juke joint and ask if they should create an acting crew together, in which he's too broken within his own soul to accept. Nonetheless, those same acting friends decide to throw on a show in Harlem in hopes to lure him back into the acting world, with him starring as Shakespeare's Othello, in which he gleefully decides to do despite the mob immediately spotting him returning to Harlem. And the mob does try to sabotage the play that they are trying to throw through violent threats, but the show still goes on. And in the final scene of the movie, we get a unique rendition of Othello.
Othello, won't you come to bed, my lord?
Nothing doing, Baltimore. Here is sleeping.
Heaven have mercy on you.
Desdemona, with all my heart. Amen.
Some bloody passion shakes thy very frame. I hope it do not point to me.
Desdemona, that handkerchief that I so loved and gave to thee, thou gavest Cassio.
No, no, my life, my love, my soul.
Sweet soul, take heed, thou art on thy deathbed.
Ah, my lord, but not to die, not yet to die. Yes, yes, tell him Desdemona.
Compared to the other films on this list, where musical numbers tend to just occur like a cutaway gag in a Family Guy film, in this film, the musical numbers at least flows in with the scenes. The final scene made the work of what the characters worked so hard for, made the plot work so hard for, especially Lim, the main character, pay off for the viewer. The editing for this film and the acting was very smooth too, and had many comedic moments as well as pleasant musical numbers. With that, along with the last scene, makes this film worthy of the number 6 slot on my list. The Duke is top. In this film that stars Ralph Cooper and Lena Horne, which was actually her first debut film, they are at a crossroads in their career and their love life because Duke, played by Ralph Cooper, who is a worn-out club promoter in the South, believes that he is holding back the career of his songstress sweetheart Ethel, played by Lena Horne, when she gets offered to perform in New York City. However, she was unwilling to leave Duke her love for a rival promoter. Talk about loyalty, right? Undeterred, Duke hatches a selfish scheme that, while it may lead Ethel to stardom in the Big Apple, also risks driving her away from him forever. So as a result, he gets fired from the job and becomes a snake oil salesman while on the road back to find Ethel, his love. If you like true romance and quasi-musical numbers, then this movie will sing for you. The acting dynamics with Duke's selfless action aimed at promoting Ethel's career even at the potential cost of their relationship highlights the emotional depth typical of romantic dramas. The setting involving the music and entertainment industry contributes to the film's unique narrative style, common in the 1930s cinema, where swing and big band was the popular music of the time. But in honesty, if you like swing music, if you are so interested in seeing Lena Horne's first film, if you like Ralph Cooper, who was a very important figure of the 1930s cinema for black filmmakers, then you will thoroughly enjoy this film. Number 4. Dark Manhattan. Before there was Nino Brown, there was Curly Thorpe. Dark Manhattan was the definitive gangster film. Was it the first? No. But it was the best out of all the gangster films created by so-called black folks that came out during this time. Starring Ralph Cooper, who was an important jack-of-all-trades creator in this time. Not only did he have his own band, he was also a race film movie star. And in this film, according to Cooper's autobiography, Dark Manhattan broke all attendance records at the Apollo Theater and in the Harlem Opera House. The film was so good that even Variety magazine stated that this film was the best black cast film ever made. And why is that? Well, the story centers around a young gangster named Curly Thorpe, played by Ralph Cooper, who is determined to take control of the number racket game in Harlem. He faces competition from rival gangs and encounters various characters in the criminal underworld, including a nightclub singer named Flo Gray, who gets caught in the crossfire. This film was like a black Scarface of its time, exploring themes of ambition, power, and the challenges faced by Afro-Americans in the 1930s. It offers a glimpse into the social and economic realities of Harlem during that time, including the allure and dangers of organized crime. The significance of this film was that this was a clear example of the success that race films could do, which provided opportunities for black actors and filmmakers to tell stories that reflected the experience of African American communities could have. The gritty realism in Dark Manhattan stands out for its realistic depiction of crime and violence, which was unusual for most race films at this time. But if you're interested in watching any early gangster films created by so-called black folks, then check out Dark Manhattan, which is number 4 on my list. Number 3, The Green Pastures. Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning play of the same name by Mark Connelly, The Green Pastures is a 1936 American film that tells the stories from the Old Testament from the perspective of rural African Americans. The films depict various biblical stories, including the creation of the world, Noah's Ark, Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and the struggles of humanity. However, these stories are reimagined with an all-black cast and set in the southern rural environment. God is portrayed as the Lord, a kind but firm figure, and heaven is depicted as a place where fish fries and baseball games are enjoyed, which, in my opinion, sounds like heaven to me too. The Green Pastures is a must-watch and one of the top films of the 1930s for several reasons. First, it was one of the few Hollywood films of the era to feature an all-black cast, providing opportunities for black actors to showcase their talents. I personally enjoy films that offer a unique and cultural-specific interpretation of biblical stories, blending them with elements of Afro-American spirituals and folklore. It provides a glimpse into the social and cultural landscapes of the time, reflecting the experiences and perspectives of Afro-Americans in the 1930s. And yes, the film has been criticized for perpetuating some racial stereotypes, such as the Lord, particularly in its portrayal of the rural black characters. While it's important to acknowledge these criticisms, it's also important to understand the film within its historical context. And once you get over that, you will find the quality and uniqueness of this film. Number 2, Way Down South. Way Down South is a 1939 American musical drama film set in the antebellum South. It's notable for a few reasons, but also carries some important caveats. The story revolves around a young orphan named Timothy who inherits a plantation and its enslaved people. A corrupt lawyer tries to take advantage of the situation, but Timothy, with the help of some of the slaves, work to protect them and the plantation. Now, some of you may think, well, number 3 was already triggering, but why is this number 2? Well, the reason why this film was number 2 was the choreography, music, the acting, and the directing of this film was top notch, plus the writing of this film was very good. It was clear that a white person from Hollywood could not write the essence of these characters. Even though it is another rare example of a Hollywood film from that era that attempts to address the issues of slavery, albeit through a very specific lens, however, the writers of this film were 2 prominent figures in the Afro-American community. The first one was Clarence Muse, who also stars in the film, but the second writer was Langston Hughes. And when you understand that, the uniqueness of this film makes much more sense on why it wasn't a stereotypical slave film that we're used to seeing about the Great White Hope and having the slaves sing the same Negro spirituals we always hear in so many films. Langston Hughes, being one of its writers, should charge anyone to see this film. And though I do agree you should view Way Down South with a critical eye of the 1930s Hollywood, it's important to understand the historical context in which it was made and to recognize its limitations and problematic elements. However, it can be also a valuable resource for understanding how Hollywood depicted slavery in the pre-civil rights era and for sparking discussions about race, representation, and historical accuracy in film. And if you're interested in this film history, particularly the portrayal of African Americans in early Hollywood, or if you're curious about the works of Clarence Muse and Langston Hughes, then Way Down South might be worth watching. But I do say watch with a critical eye and also just watch with the understanding that this was the 1930s. But in my opinion, I believe it is number 2 on my list. Number 1, The Emperor Jones. If you've seen my review on The Emperor Jones on this channel, you should not be surprised that this is number 1 on my list. It stars Paul Robeson in the title role and is notable for its exploration of the themes of power, fear, and the psychological impact of colonialism. The film tells the story of Brutus Jones, played by Paul Robeson, a black man who escapes to the Caribbean islands and becomes its self-proclaimed emperor. However, his reign is short-lived and he is eventually overthrown and forced to flee into the jungle. And as he wanders through the jungle, his past comes back to haunt him, and he is confronted by his own fears and the ghosts of his past actions. Paul Robeson's performance as Brutus Jones is considered one of the greatest of his career. He brings a powerful presence and emotional depth to the role, capturing the character's arrogance, fear, and ultimate downfall. The film explores complex themes of power, colonialism, and the psychological impact of oppression, offering a nuanced look at the character of Brutus Jones, who is both a victim of circumstance and the perpetuator of his own downfall. The Emperor Jones is a significant film in the history of Afro-American representation in Hollywood. It was one of the first films to feature a black actor in the leading role, and it challenged the racial stereotypes that were prevalent in Hollywood at that time. I have made many of my friends watch this, and when they finished watching this, they appreciated and loved me more. And I hope that y'all do the same thing. And I hope you will appreciate this channel and this list. I hope this piques your interest in watching these films. And if you ever watch these films, let me know if you agree or disagree with my list and which ones you will rank and why. All in all, the 1930s was a very important time in Afro-American filmmaking, for we were able to witness more actors and filmmakers and begin to see the training ground that influenced many of the stars that we see in the 1940s and the 50s, such as Lena Horne. Despite their limitations, Afro-Americans films of the 1930s were a crucial part of film history. They provided opportunities for black actors and filmmakers. They offer counter-narratives to Hollywood representations and played a significant role in building a black film industry and fostering a sense of community among black audiences. They remain an important area of study for understanding the history of Afro-American representation in cinema. Thank you for watching my channel. I'm your host, Reggie of Afro-American Films. Please do like, subscribe, and comment. And remember, the truth shall make you free. Peace.